One day, I found myself in an unimaginable situation. It all began when I took my husband to the doctor for a routine checkup. What was supposed to be a routine visit turned my world upside down. Dr. Robert, with a grave expression, shared some shocking news about my husband. The severity in his eyes told me this was no joke. I felt a wave of panic and disbelief wash over me. My husband, who I had cared for through his illness, was now a source of fear and concern. Dr. Robert urged me to consider my safety, suggesting I might need to distance myself from my husband. His words left me feeling overwhelmed and scared. My name is Linda Blair, and I'm a 50-year-old who has dedicated 10 years to working at a leading pharmaceutical company. That place has become my second home, offering comfort and a sense of belonging. Despite my age, I've continued to work full-time, earning the respect and admiration of my colleagues. Not many people my age are still working as I do, but I've never minded. My dedication to my job was partly because I remained single until 4 years ago. My manager, Smith, and I shared a close bond partly because we were both single. He once jokingly asked if I was ever going to get married, a comment that could have been taken the wrong way, but I knew it was all in good humor. Around that time, I was secretly seeing Harry, who would later become my husband. Harry was a bit older, previously married and divorced, and like me, wasn't interested in having children. We met through a marriage consultation service, seeking companionship for our later years. Choosing to keep our relationship private, we didn't share our plans with anyone, even as our manager made lighthearted jabs about marriage. Eventually, Harry and I tied the knot quietly, without a ceremony, simply signing the necessary paperwork at City Hall. The simplicity of the process surprised me, but I was excited for our future together. But now, faced with Dr. Robert's alarming advice, I was forced to reassess everything. My feelings of compassion for my sick husband were now tangled with fear and uncertainty. Dr. Robert's words echoed in my mind, urging me to take action for my own safety. As I stood there trying to process the situation, I realized I needed to make a decision, and fast. The life I had known and the future I had envisioned were suddenly on uncertain ground. I'm Linda, and my husband, Harry, works at a factory. To be honest, I earn more than he does. Harry started his job there right after finishing high school. As for me, I grew up in an orphanage and always dreamt of being independent. That's why I didn't want to quit my job at the pharmaceutical company even after we got married. I loved my job too much. When Harry and I tied the knot, I immediately told my manager, Smith, about it. He congratulated me, but I could tell he had mixed feelings. Maybe he felt a bit lonely. Because I, his buddy in singleness, got married first, I tried teasing him about it, but he brushed it off. So, I let the matter drop. Despite Smith's reaction, I was over the moon about starting a new chapter with Harry. I imagined all the wonderful things our future would hold, but reality turned out to be less shiny than my dreams. Life as newlyweds was pretty standard. Not much changed for me. I kept working, and the biggest change was probably moving to a more rural area and commuting by car instead of the bus. Harry and I shared my old car because he didn't have one. About a year into our marriage, though, things started to get rocky. Harry began showing signs of depression. He seemed off, hardly eating his breakfast, getting lost in his thoughts, and even getting small things like condiments mixed up. His clothes didn't match, and he became quieter at work and at home. Although I've always appreciated Harry's quiet strength, his silence became too heavy, making it feel like I was living alone. This loneliness crept up on me as I noticed these small but significant changes in him. It dawned on me that Harry might be dealing with a mental health issue. Watching someone you care about struggle without knowing how to help is incredibly hard. I decided to take Harry to a clinic that specializes in mind and body health, where he was diagnosed with depression. I had a basic understanding of depression, but hearing the diagnosis made my world feel a bit dimmer. The doctor explained that the best way to tackle depression is to address its root cause directly. However, pinpointing the exact reason for Harry's depression was challenging. He had been working at the same factory for years without any issues, and nothing significant had changed in his job. If anything, I worried that perhaps our marriage had somehow contributed to his state. During our conversations with the doctor, I assured him that we were living a content life and couldn't identify any direct pressures at home that might have led to Harry's condition. The doctor encouraged us to return if we noticed any changes or had any insights into potential causes of his depression. Despite multiple visits to the clinic, we couldn't find the root cause of Harry's distress. Over time, his depression only deepened. On his worst days, Harry would barely get out of bed, plagued by headaches or calling in sick to work. His appetite vanished, and he lost a noticeable amount of weight. Eventually, he was unable to continue working and had to leave his job. Harry felt terribly guilty for putting all the financial burden on me, but I reassured him that I was okay with working. My primary concern was his well-being. It was tough to see him so affected, and I constantly worried about him, especially when I was at work. There was an incident where he went out and couldn't find his way back home, which made me fear he was battling not just depression but potentially dementia as well. This possibility added to my stress. When colleagues asked about how things were going, I had to admit that Harry wasn't improving. Seeing someone you love struggle so much without a clear way to help is incredibly difficult. Smith noticed. I was looking particularly worn out one day when Smith handed me an energy drink. Drinking it made me feel a little better, and I was touched by his gesture of support. He reminded me that we're all in this journey together, and his words nearly brought me to tears. With everything going on with Harry, I hadn't realized how much stress I'd been piling up on myself. It became clear that I needed to keep myself together, or else I might break down too. So, I threw myself into work, trying to maintain some normalcy in our lives. 1 year flew by, and things with Harry hadn't improved. In fact, they had only gotten worse. As our 3rd wedding anniversary approached, I couldn't see any light at the end of the tunnel for his condition. Then, one morning, I noticed our car wasn't where it should have been. Confused, I checked again, but the car was definitely missing. Since Harry's diagnosis, I was the only one who drove it. I hadn't used the car since the day before, which meant it should have been at home. Concerned, I asked Harry if he knew anything about where the car might be. He casually mentioned he thought it was there when he got home yesterday. I remembered he had gone out for a bit while I was at work. The doctor had suggested he try walking or jogging to help him cope. If the car was there when he returned, it must have disappeared sometime during the night. With the car gone, I had no choice but to use public transport, which made me about 10 minutes late for work. I explained the situation to Smith, who was understanding but puzzled about the car's whereabouts. He wondered if Harry might have taken it, but I dismissed the idea given Harry's condition and his aversion to driving since falling ill. It didn't make sense. Despite Harry's occasional lapses in memory and frequent mood swings, I couldn't imagine him being responsible for the missing car. The mystery of the car added yet another layer of complexity to our already challenging situation. Right after realizing the car was gone, I didn't waste any time reporting it to the police, hoping it would turn up soon. But deep down, a nagging worry haunted me that it might be gone for good. As if that wasn't enough, something else strange occurred. On the day I was supposed to get my paycheck, I went to the bank to withdraw some money and noticed that my personal bank account was empty. I was taken aback. We do have a shared account, which I checked next, only to find it was also at zero. This left me completely baffled. Harry and I shared the joint account, but he had no access to my personal account, nor did he know its PIN. Yet somehow, all our savings had vanished. The cold wave of shock hit me hard. Once home, I confronted Harry. I asked him if he knew anything about the missing funds from our joint account. He seemed genuinely confused and denied knowing anything about it. Considering his state of mind due to depression, I hesitated to press further, fearing it might add to his stress. Harry, with his gaze fixed on the ceiling, seemed distant, lost in one of his frequent dazes attributed to his condition. It made me wonder if he could have actually taken the money. Planning to bring this issue up with the police, I was overwhelmed by the double blow of losing both our car and our savings. The financial pinch was sharp, made worse by my lack of a family safety net, having grown up in an orphanage with no parents to turn to for help. Amidst these troubles, it was suggested that we switch Harry to a larger hospital with more resources than the small community psychiatric clinic we'd been using. The clinic had reached its limits in what it could do for him and recommended a general hospital for better care. They even provided a referral letter. So, we decided to make our first visit to the general hospital, taking a taxi there. The experience was new and a bit daunting for me, and throughout the journey, Harry remained quiet, lost in his own thoughts. As we arrived at the hospital, I took a deep breath and walked into the hospital, handing over the referral letter at the reception, bracing myself for a bit of a wait given it was a busy general hospital. The lobby was crowded with patients, each waiting for their turn. After around an hour, Harry was finally called in for his consultation. While he went inside, I took out a book to pass the time. But barely had Harry entered the doctor's office when a nurse approached me. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Simmons?" she asked. I confirmed, and she mentioned the doctor wanted to see me. I was used to discussing Harry's condition, so I assumed it was a similar situation that time and followed her, albeit with a bit of anxiety. The nurse led me to a different room, where I was greeted by a doctor who looked about a decade my senior, with graying hair and a kind demeanor. Before I could even settle in, I asked if this was about Harry's condition. He nodded gravely, and I prepared myself for potentially bad news. The doctor's next words took me completely by surprise, however. He urged me to distance myself from my husband, revealing that Harry had been arrested for fraud 10 years ago. My mind spun with confusion. Why was this coming up now during a routine medical visit? The doctor explained his suspicions about Harry's depression, suggesting that he might be pretending. He recounted recognizing Harry from a surgery 10 years ago where he had treated a deep cut on Harry's leg. The revelation was jarring. Here I was, thinking we were addressing Harry's mental health, only to discover his hidden past and a possible deception about his current state. This unexpected turn of events left me reeling, trying to reconcile the caring husband I knew with the person the doctor described. When the doctor mentioned recognizing a large scar on Harry's right leg, everything started to make sense. I knew of the scar but never knew its origin, as Harry had never mentioned it. Learning that the doctor before me was the one who had treated Harry's injury years ago felt like an unbelievable twist of fate. The story unfolded further when the doctor revealed that Harry had injured himself during a dispute with his former wife, a dispute that arose because he had swindled her. He had stolen her luxury items and money. Shockingly, he had also faked dementia during that time, manipulating his wife into lowering her guard before committing the fraud. This pattern of pretending to be ill to facilitate his deceit was appalling. Hearing about Harry's criminal past and his arrest was staggering. I hadn't looked into Harry's background before marrying him. Being alone most of my life, I was just happy to find someone willing to be my partner. The doctor's stern warning that Harry could be a danger to me sent chills down my spine. There was a seriousness in his tone that made it clear this was no laughing matter. The realization hit me hard. I had been deceived. In the days that followed, I struggled to act normal around Harry while secretly planning my next steps. I decided to set up surveillance cameras around our home to watch Harry's activities when I wasn't there. About a week later, I noticed a missing watch and bag. Reviewing the camera footage, I saw Harry leave the house with them and return later with a wad of cash, looking suspiciously pleased with himself. His demeanor did not match that of someone suffering from depression. This footage confirmed my worst fears. Harry was behind the theft of my belongings, the car, and our savings. Facing the hard evidence of his deceit was crushing. Harry had lied to and manipulated me, betraying the trust one had placed in him. It was clear that I needed to take significant action against someone who had pretended to be vulnerable and in need of care, only to exploit my compassion and generosity. The realization that Harry had betrayed my trust was unbearable. I had dedicated my life to working and caring for what I thought was a sick partner. A divorce felt too insignificant a response to the depth of deception I had endured. It was clear we needed to part ways, but I wanted more than just a separation. I wanted Harry to truly understand the gravity of his actions and to make amends for the harm he had caused. With a heavy heart and tears threatening to spill, I gathered the divorce papers and meticulously filled them out with all the necessary details. The following day, pretending everything was normal, I informed Harry that I'd be stepping out briefly. I had already taken a day off from work, explaining the urgency of my situation to my employer, who had agreed to my sudden leave. At the police station, I presented my case, showing the officers the footage I had captured of Harry's deceit. Initially, they were hesitant to proceed based solely on the video. However, after verifying with the pawn shop where Harry had sold the stolen items and locating my car being sold as a used vehicle, the evidence against him began to mount. It was also confirmed that he had unlawfully accessed my bank accounts, and suspicions about his feigned depression were raised. As the truth unraveled, I was overwhelmed by a complex mix of relief and sorrow. The police decided to act swiftly, given Harry's criminal history, and prepared to arrest him. Returning home with the officers in the early afternoon, I found Harry at home, visibly startled by my unexpected presence and the sight of the police. Despite the divorce papers in my hand, his attention was fixed on the officers as one of them declared his arrest for fraud. Harry protested, claiming his depression as a defense, but I knew better. The doctor from the general hospital had already shed light on the likelihood of his deceit regarding his mental health condition. In that moment, facing both the legal consequences of his actions and the end of our marriage, Harry's facade began to crumble. The decision to take this course of action was difficult but necessary to protect myself and seek justice for the betrayal and manipulation I had endured. On my recent visit to the hospital, a doctor recognized Harry from his past actions. He shared that Harry had once feigned dementia to trick his former wife and expressed doubts about Harry's current claims of depression. Despite these serious accusations, Harry remained unshaken in front of the police, dismissively denying everything. It was as if his history of deceit had prepared him for this moment, showing no sign of guilt or remorse. Harry challenged us, demanding proof of his fraudulent actions. His boldness was baffling, especially with the police right there, ready to arrest him based on solid evidence. It was a clear indication of his habitual manipulation and his underestimation of the situation's seriousness. For 4 years, he had lied to me, taking advantage of my trust to steal from me and misuse my goodwill. Yet, in a twisted turn of blame, Harry suggested it was my fault for being too trusting, insulting me further. His audacity was astounding. I had supported him, hoping for his recovery, only to be repaid with betrayal and scorn. In that moment, my patience vanished. I declared my intention to seek legal advice and pursue alimony, urging him to face the consequences of his actions. At the police station, my outburst surprised even the officers, but it seemed to shake Harry's composure finally. As the police handcuffed him, Harry's defiance crumbled. He looked defeated, his arrogance replaced with frustration as he was led away. Watching the scene, I felt detached, as if I were observing someone else's life unraveling. Since the doctor's warning, nothing seemed real anymore. Yet, here I was, facing the harsh truth of my situation, determined to move forward from the chaos Harry had created. Watching Harry being led away by the police felt surreal, almost like a scene from a dream. This moment marked a turning point, allowing me to envision a return to my life before the chaos of marriage engulfed it. Though a sense of relief washed over me, knowing I wouldn't spend my future under Harry's manipulative control, a wave of loneliness followed. Having waited more than 47 years to marry, the prospect of solitude once again cast a shadow over my newfound freedom. 2 months later, our divorce was finalized. The process had been slightly delayed due to Harry's arrest, but by the time everything was official, my emotions had settled, enabling me to reflect on our shared history with a clear mind. Harry's future was uncertain, facing imprisonment for his second offense. I could only hope this experience would lead him to sincerely reconsider his choices. In the wake of our marriage, which had dissolved into nothing more than a disillusioning memory, I found myself pondering my next steps over a simple lunch at work. It was then that my boss, Smith, approached with a casual yet loaded comment. As he joined me with his store-bought hot dog lunch, he said, "I think you'd be just fine if you were with me." His words caught me off guard, and it took a moment for their full weight to sink in, leaving me momentarily flustered. "Yes, I'm serious," he added, seeing my hesitation. His tone was smooth yet sincere. I was speechless, my lunch momentarily forgotten as I processed his proposition. Smith then returned to work, leaving me to contemplate his unexpected offer. In a daze, the idea of a romantic relationship with Smith had never crossed my mind. Yet, I couldn't deny the care and stability he had always shown me. His steady presence and responsible nature suddenly cast him in a new light. Despite my initial reaction, I began to evaluate such matters as I continued eating. The seeds of possibility Smith had planted began to take root, suggesting a future I hadn't dared to imagine until now. The thought of inviting Smith out for a meal after work sparked a warmth within me, kindling a sense of hope for the future. Perhaps this was the perfect moment to embark on a new journey, to explore the possibility of happiness and companionship once again. The idea of stepping out of my comfort zone and into a new beginning with someone who had shown me kindness and support felt both thrilling and comforting. Tonight, I decided, could be the start of something new and beautiful.
I caught my cheating wife on camera. Her viral video triggered an unforgettable act of revenge. If your wife left the house at 10 p.m., would you be worried? I wouldn't be, because I just need to turn on the local news to see her. My wife, Carol Martin, co-hosts the nightly news on a top TV station in Birmingham. She's both smart and beautiful. and many believe her next job could be in a major market like Atlanta or Chicago. There's even talk of a New York offer, the ultimate goal for news anchors. I'm Tom Bailey, and Carol kept her maiden name for broadcasting, as many female announcers do, to separate their personal and professional lives. You can see how proud and lucky I am to be her husband. We met at the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa. She majored in broadcasting, and I studied marketing. We met at a freshman year fraternity party, and I was instantly smitten. She was tall, blonde, and stunning. I was outgoing, but not an athlete or model material. Despite this, we hit it off and became a couple. We had our ups and downs, even breaking up for 2 weeks. I missed her so much I ran to her, only to find her running toward me. It was a movie-like moment, and we promised never to part again. We were madly in love. By senior year, we were engaged and living together off campus, but we waited until after graduation to marry. She wanted a big wedding, and her family could afford it. We married in the Canterbury Chapel a week after graduation. Carol got a weekend weather anchor job in Huntsville, not prestigious, but a start. I got a low-level job at a local ad agency, gaining experience. Carol's career quickly took off. Within a year, she was offered a reporter position at the largest station in Mobile. We moved to the Gulf Coast, where I found a job at a big ad firm. Carol thrived, becoming a weekend newscaster and eventually the nightly news co-host. Her pregnancy announcement boosted her popularity even more, and our daughter, Susan's, birth became a local event. The station produced a documentary series on Carol's experience as a new mother returning to work, winning a regional Emmy. Her success led to a co-host offer from Birmingham's top station, WSYY. We left our beloved Mobile for Birmingham, knowing it could lead to even bigger opportunities. Birmingham, with its million population and significant media market, was a major step up for Carol's career. I was cautious about moving to Birmingham after being so comfortable in Mobile, but it turned out I had no reason to worry. Thanks to recommendations from my friends in Mobile and help from the Birmingham station, I found a great job at the city's second-largest advertising agency. The station's management was fantastic, connecting us with a knowledgeable real estate agent who found us a wonderful house in Hoover and a great daycare for baby Susan. The move was smoother than I expected, and we settled into our new life quickly. Our daily routine is quite different because being married to a television journalist is unique. I wake up, make breakfast, and go to work, leaving Carol and Susan to sleep. Carol gets up with Susan and spends the morning with her. After lunch, she takes Susan to Mrs. Olop's, a sweet woman who looks after Susan and a few other children, introducing them to concepts they'll encounter in kindergarten. I pick Susan up after work, cook dinner, and bathe her before reading to her and putting her to bed. Then I relax until Carol comes home, often waking me up on the couch. Carol's schedule is demanding. She arrives at the station at 3 p.m. to prepare for the evening news, goes on air at 6 p.m. and again at 10 p.m. Lately, the news director, Dawn Sanchez, has been holding post-mortem meetings after the late newscast, making her stay even later. The competition for ratings is fierce, and stations constantly seek to increase their audience share. As an advertising professional, I understand the focus on ratings, but as a husband, I miss time alone with Carol. We both work long hours and often feel more like neighbors than spouses. Although we try to spend weekends together, it's challenging, especially with Carol's increasing public appearances. Our schedules rarely align, making it difficult to discuss our situation, and Carol seems reluctant to talk about it because there are no easy answers. When we married, we discussed these challenges, and I agreed to everything. Moreover, many of our friends face similar issues with demanding jobs. I try to be supportive because I knew what I was getting into, and Carol's income significantly eases our life, even though money isn't everything. Eventually, I couldn't keep my frustration to myself. One day at lunch, I confided in Lou Faraday, the media director at our agency. Lou, married with a daughter slightly older than Susan, became my best friend at work. When he talked about how happy he was with his family, I blurted out, "Damn, I wish I had what you have." "Looks like trouble in paradise, buddy," Lou said. "What's going on?" I poured my heart out, surprising myself with how bad I felt. "I'm married to one of the best women on TV," I grumbled, "but I see her as often as her fans do." Lou shook his head sympathetically. "That sucks, Tom. Can't you take a vacation or a long weekend? Your folks would love to keep Susan." I thought about it. I said, "But Carol says Don Sanchez is pushing them to keep ratings up. He's afraid their absence will cause a drop they can't recover from." "Look," Lou replied, "I know Don Sanchez. He's ambitious, but also decent. Maybe you should talk to him and see if he can help you and Carol get some time together. I don't know, Lou, I sighed. Carol would liquidate me if she found out I talked to her boss. She doesn't need to know, Lou said. Don's coming to the agency tomorrow for a presentation. You can catch him afterward. I don't want to mix personal issues with work, I said. Don't be silly. It's just a preliminary meeting. This is a great chance to talk to him. That evening, Carol arrived even later than usual. She didn't wake me from the couch, where I had dozed off. I woke up in the middle of the night, dragged myself to bed next to her, and thought, now we won't even get to kiss her goodnight. Determined to change our pattern, I kept an eye on the conference room the next day. As their meeting ended, I waved at Don. He was in a good mood. "Hey Tom, how's my favorite news anchor's husband?" he shouted. "Hey Don, do you have a couple of minutes?" I asked. "Sure, what's on your mind?" he asked cheerfully. "I need you to give Carol a break." "You're working her too hard," I said, frowning. He looked concerned. "Did she complain?" "No, she likes it," I replied. "I'm the one who suffers. I don't see her anymore." He relaxed and joked. "You knew she had a demanding job when you married her." "True," I agreed, "but all these appearances and post-show meetings cut into our time together." Okay, he said. "We've probably overdone it. I'll see if we can lighten her schedule, and don't worry about the postmortems. We haven't had one since the last ratings came out." "Have you seen how much we're outranking the competition?" "Management is thrilled. I've got to get to my next meeting. Keep pleasing your bride with that." He patted my back and left. Back at my desk, I checked the ratings and saw the last set was published a month ago. If Don hadn't held a post-mortem in a month, what was Carol doing when she came home so late? The thought shook me. I wondered if she was having an affair, but quickly dismissed it. Carol loved me and wouldn't jeopardize our marriage. There were plenty of reasons she could be late, like catching up on fan mail or unwinding, but those reasons didn't make me feel any better. At that moment, Lou poked his head in. "Hey, I saw you talking to Don. Did he give you any relief?" "I'm not sure, Lou. I guess I won't know until I talk to Carol." He looked puzzled, but when I didn't say more, he turned to leave. "Okay, buddy, let me know if there's anything I can do." The rest of the day I was like a zombie. I went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about what Don had said and what Carol had told me about her late hours. I considered confronting her, but worried I'd look foolish if the explanation was innocent. Accusing her of an affair wouldn't help our relationship, yet avoiding the issue felt weak. By the time I left work to pick up Susan, I hadn't solved anything. Thankfully, my 4-year-old's demands distracted me for the evening. She was unusually clingy, sensing my mood, and didn't want me to stop reading to her. When she finally fell asleep, I found tears welling up, thinking how sad it would be if her parents divorced. Emotionally drained, I watched TV but couldn't focus until the news came on. Watching Carol, I remembered how much I loved her and convinced myself she wouldn't cheat. It was past midnight when Carol arrived. "Oh, I didn't realize you were still up," she said, surprised. I hugged her. "I just wanted to see you. You're awfully late tonight." She kissed me quickly and took off her shoes. "Yeah, sorry. Don held us up again with one of his autopsies," she said, heading to bed. As she walked upstairs, I realized she lied. Don said he hadn't held a session in a month. I didn't want to believe she was cheating, but also didn't want to ignore the truth. The next day, I asked Lou to have lunch with me. He sensed my seriousness and agreed. We drove to a restaurant far from the office in silence. When we ordered, I hesitated. Then Lou said, "It's Carol, isn't it?" His words opened the floodgates, and I poured out my fears and insecurities. Lou listened silently. "Damn, I thought you and Carol had the happiest marriage," Lou said. "Me too," I replied sadly. "So what are you going to do?" he asked. His question clarified my thoughts. "Lou, I need to go to the station and see for myself. If I'm wrong and everything's innocent, I'll sneak out undetected. Carol will never know." "What if you're right?" Lou asked quietly. "I don't know, but at least I'll know the truth. It's better than this agony." "What about Susan?" he asked. "I've already thought of that," I told Lou. "When we get back, I'll call Mrs. Alsop and ask if she can keep Susan late tonight. She's offered before, so it should be fine." We finished lunch and returned to the office. Though still distraught, I felt some relief having a plan. Even those facing execution feel some relief when the day finally arrives. Mrs. Alsop agreed but asked me to return by 11 p.m. "I have work in the morning," she said. It wasn't much time, but it was the best I could get, so I promised. After work, I informed Susan of the change. She cried at first, but brightened when Mrs. Alsop mentioned a pizza party. I paid for the extra time and pizza, then left before Susan could get upset again. I went home, made dinner, but couldn't eat. Cleaning up, I tried to distract myself, but doubts grew. The news wouldn't end until 10:30 p.m. What if Carol came straight home? What would I say? These fears paralyzed me until I remembered my resolve at lunch. I had to do something. By p.m., I decided to go to the station. There wouldn't be many people there, an engineer, 2 cameramen, and a sound technician. Hopefully, I could go unnoticed. When I arrived, I realized my mistake. Joe, the night watchman, was there. He knew me, so getting in wasn't an issue, but I had to sign in. So much for stealth. "Good evening, Mr. Bailey," Joe said. "Here to see the news?" I replied, signing the log. Joe looked at me sympathetically. "There won't be a problem, will there?" "No, of course not," I replied quickly, heading to the studio. What did he mean? Did he know something? I peeked through the blackout curtains. The news had just ended, and Carol was heading towards the green room instead of her dressing room. The green room was dark, usually reserved for guests who never appear on the 10 News. As Carol opened the door, a lamp inside revealed a male figure. The door closed, and I was left outside, heart pounding. I could burst in, but if it was innocent, Carol would never forgive me. If I stayed outside, I'd never know. I remembered a small observation window Carol had shown me. I headed there, checking the time. It was already 10:45. I needed to leave soon to pick up Susan. I peered through the window and saw Carol in a carnal embrace with a man. I recorded a video with my phone, the light making her black lingerie stand out against her skin. I wanted to end it, but seeing the time, I had to pick up Susan. I ran to the lobby, nodded to Joe, and headed out the door. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bailey," Joe said. "Damn," I thought, does everyone but me know what's going on? I jumped into the car and sped to Mrs. Alsop's house. She let me in, and I found Susan asleep. Wrapping her in a blanket, I picked her up and thanked Mrs. Alsop for keeping her. She looked at me oddly and asked, "Are you all right, Mr. Bailey?" Only then did I realize I had tears streaming down my cheeks. "Oh, it's nothing, just got something in my eye," I said. I thanked her again, carried Susan to the car, and drove home. Susan stayed asleep as I carried her upstairs and put her to bed. She looked so sweet and innocent, and I longed for the innocence I had lost tonight. I got a beer from the fridge and sat in the dark waiting. Everything was quiet, and a memory of my grandmother's passing flashed through my mind, the silence deepened by my sadness. When Carol got home around 1 a.m., she turned on the kitchen light and saw me sitting there. "Tom, what are you doing?" she asked, surprised. "I've been waiting for you," I replied evenly. "The security guard said you came by the studio. Is everything okay with Susan?" "Where is she?" Carol inquired. "Mrs. Alsop kept her for me. She's asleep upstairs," I answered. "Well, if you came to the studio, why didn't you stop by my office?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion. I steadied myself. This was it. "I saw you tonight. I saw you go into the green room with Ted Stevenson," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Oh, we just had a meeting after the news," she replied nonchalantly. "Carol, I looked through the observation window. I saw what your meeting was about. I even saw your new lingerie," I stated, watching as she looked embarrassed. "Oh, Tom, I'm so sorry," she said softly. "Are you sorry you did it, or just sorry you got caught?" I demanded, my frustration growing. "I'm sorry you found out this way," she said quietly, avoiding my gaze. "You're leaving me for him, aren't you?" I asked, feeling a lump form in my throat. She dropped to her knees and took my hands. "No, honey, I'm not leaving you. This is just a fling. Maybe it'll be over soon and things will go back to normal," she said, her words shocking me. "You're not going to." "Stop? You're going to keep cheating on me?" I asked in disbelief. "It doesn't mean anything. Just let me have my fun and I'll come back to you," she said, her tone dismissive. "I can't believe this. You expect me to agree to be a betrayed man?" I shouted, unable to contain my anger. She stood up and looked at me coldly. "Tom, you really don't have a say," she said bluntly. "I'm your husband. If you don't stop, I'll file for divorce," I threatened, hoping to make her realize the gravity of the situation. She looked at me with a cold, calculating expression. "I don't think that's in your best interest, Tom. You'll lose custody of Susan and most of our assets. The court won't care about the affair. They'll prioritize Susan's welfare, and I'll get custody. You'll only see her on weekends and some holidays," she stated matter-of-factly. Wait, you're the one committing infidelity, I protested, feeling the situation slip further out of my control. This is a no-fault state, Tom. The court won't care. Ask a lawyer if you don't believe me, she said with a finality that chilled me. I don't want this to happen, Tom. I want our family to stay together. This fling shouldn't concern us. Just think about it, she said, kissing my head before heading to bed. I sat there, overwhelmed by anger, loss, sadness, and confusion. That Carol would cheat on me was unthinkable, and that she would suggest continuing the affair was beyond comprehension. Finally, I dragged myself to bed and fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the night's events. Even though I was exhausted, I woke up at 6 the next morning. I showered, shaved, and dressed mechanically. Wild thoughts ran through my mind. Run away, shake Carol awake, kidnap Susan, or never get out of bed again. But looking at Susan asleep, I knew I had to stay strong for her. Doing something stupid would only cause me to lose her. I had to put her first. So I did my morning chores and headed to the office, working on autopilot. Tom, Lou said, are you okay? When I didn't answer, he came in and closed the door. What's wrong, he asked. I told him everything about last night. Lou listened, shocked by Carol's attitude. Damn it, he said. She expects you to put up with her cheating. He looked me in the eye. Carol has changed. You can't rely on her anymore. You need to look out for yourself. The first thing you should do is consult an attorney. You need to find out your rights. Hello, I replied. I don't know any lawyers in Birmingham. That's where I can help, he said with a smile. My college roommate is a lawyer here. I'll call him. A moment later, he returned with a piece of paper. You have an appointment at PM today. Here's his name and address. Thanks, Lou. At least it gives me something to do, I said gratefully. No problem. After you meet him, come back and tell me what he said, he instructed. The meeting with the lawyer was disheartening. He listened to my story and then explained, in a no-fault state, the court doesn't care who did what. It only decides on the division of property and child welfare. What does that mean for me? I asked. In short, Carol will get custody unless she's unfit. You'll get visitation rights, but Susan will live with her. You'll pay child support, even though Carol makes more money, he said matter-of-factly. And the house? I asked, hoping for a glimmer of good news. It's joint property, but the court prefers children to stay in the house. Carol will likely keep it until Susan turns 18. Then you can sell it and divide the equity, he explained. But what if she moves to another market? I objected. Then you can sell the house. Until then it stays put, he clarified. I shook my head, feeling defeated. Damn it, she knew exactly what she was talking about. I'm screwed, I muttered. I'm sorry, he said as we shook hands. It's not always fair, but that's the law. Driving back, I felt like I was being punished for a sin I didn't commit. Lou saw my face and knew the outcome. Damn it, Lou, I said. It's just not fair. She put me in this situation and there's nothing I can do. I have to put up with it to keep my daughter and my home. I paced around the office. Now I understand why some men lose it. Don't even joke about that, Tom, Lou said quickly. I know you're angry, but if anything happens to her, I don't want to testify that you made threats. Okay, I get it, I agreed. I wouldn't do anything like that. It just feels like she's an albatross around my neck. I glanced out the window and groaned. A new billboard showed Carol and Ted Stevenson with the caption, Birmingham's choice for the 6000 news. See, I said to Lou, pointing at it. I can't escape her, even here. Lou looked at the sign and then had an idea. How desperate are you to get out of this mess? He asked. Not desperate enough for violence, I said firmly. No, not that, but I have an idea, he said. We talked for an hour, with me repeatedly saying it was crazy and wouldn't work. Lou kept asking, how much worse off would you be? Eventually, I realized I was stuck and needed to try something. Okay, Lou, I'm in, I said finally. I left the office feeling determined but filled with doubt. Could I risk losing my daughter for this plan? Maybe it was better to live as a betrayed man. As I picked up Susan and made dinner, I kept thinking. I turned off the TV, unable to watch Carol and Ted on the news. Surprisingly, Carol came home early. She put Susan to bed, and I heard them laughing and reading stories. It felt like old times. When Carol came downstairs, I thanked her. She misses you, especially at bedtime. I know, she said softly, and I missed her too. I wondered if she was reconsidering her choices, but my hopes were dashed quickly. I'm taking a vacation next week, she said. Don Sanchez suggested it because our ratings are so high. I'll check with my boss tomorrow to join you, I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. No, Tom, Ted and I are going away alone. We're tired of sneaking around and want to enjoy each other without worries. I was stunned. She continued, Mrs. Alsop will keep Susan all week. You just need to drop her off and pick her up. Here's where I'll be if you need to contact me. She handed me a paper. We'll be back on Sunday and things will go back to normal. She kissed me on the head like a child and said, Thanks for taking care of everything, honey. Then went to bed. Oh my God, I thought. This is the most humiliating experience of my life. I was shaking with anger and knew I had to regain my dignity. Lou's crazy plan seemed like the best option. I left work early on Friday to see Carol before she left with Ted Stevenson. I arranged for Mrs. Alsop to keep Susan overnight, ensuring she wouldn't witness any arguments. I checked Carol's closet and saw her suitcases, so I knew she'd come home to pack. When her car pulled in, I waited in the living room. What are you doing here? She asked. Is Susan okay? She's fine, I said. She's at Mrs. Olop's. Then why are you here? I wanted to convince you not to go away with Ted this week, I told her. She put her hands on her hips. I've told you I'm having my affair with Ted. When we get back, it will be over and everything will go back to normal. You just have to be patient. But what about our wedding vows? I asked. What about leaving everyone else behind? Those vows were from another time. No one believes that nonsense anymore, Carol said, irritated. But this is infidelity. I don't want you to dishonor our marriage, I insisted. Tom, if I want to be with Ted, I will. This has nothing to do with you and me, she replied dismissively. But what about your fans? They won't approve, I argued. I don't care what they think. In a year, I'll leave this town for a real city. What people here think means nothing to me now. Stop pestering me. I have to pack or I'll be late. If you can't stand seeing me with Ted, leave now, she said coldly. I stood up, slumping my shoulders. I'm sorry, Carol. I'm sorry for everything. I left and drove to the local tavern. I needed to relax. As I sipped my second beer, Lou walked in. Hey, buddy, he greeted. How'd it go? I don't know, Lou. You'd have to see for yourself, I replied, feeling defeated. Not until I try what you did, he said with a determined look. We finished our beers, then drove back to my house. Carol was gone. Lou sat at my computer and with a few keystrokes brought up the footage. We watched as Carol rejected my pleas and detailed her plans with Ted. What a cow, Lou muttered. Then he saw her dismiss her fans and talk about leaving town. Lou's face lit up. We got her. This is better than we hoped. He saved the recordings to a flash drive and removed the hidden cameras. Backup copy, he said, holding up the drive. We drove back to the tavern for Lou's car. He insisted I follow him home for dinner. Edie made a big dinner. If you don't show up, she'll be pissed, he urged. I reluctantly followed him. When we arrived, Ed hugged me and kissed my cheek. Whether it was friendship or pity, I appreciated it. I don't remember much of the dinner, just picking at my food while Lou and Edie exchanged concerned glances. Afterward, they led me to the den, and Lou opened a bottle of wine. We drank until Edie couldn't hold back any longer. I'm so angry and disappointed in Carol. I don't know what to say. She always seemed so sweet and loving. When did she turn into a selfish, promiscuous woman? Edie exclaimed. Success has changed her. Now she thinks she can do anything. She turned sharply to Lou. Look, do whatever you can to help Tom. I don't like taking sides in divorces, but this is different. Carol is out of line and we need to help Tom keep his daughter. She then gave Lou a piercing stare. And if you get hit on by any of those models or TV personalities, you better say no, or I'll come after you with a butcher knife. Lou and I laughed, but I wasn't sure if she was exaggerating to make a point. We talked and drank into the night until I collapsed on their couch. I vaguely remember Edie covering me with a blanket and patting my arm. The next thing I knew, morning light was streaming through the window, and I had a horrible taste in my mouth. Lou lent me a toothbrush and razor, and I tried to make myself presentable. Ed had made a big breakfast, and I joined them at the table. My appetite was a little better, probably due to my survival instincts kicking in. After breakfast, Lou took my hand. Leave everything to me. I've got a lot to do this weekend. Just pick up Susan and get out of here. I'll keep you posted, he said reassuringly. Lou, I don't know what I'd do without you, I said sincerely. I hugged him awkwardly and headed home. I had one more task I wasn't looking forward to. I found Ted and Missy Stevenson's number in our address book. When I called, Missy answered. "Hi, Missy, this is Tom Bailey, Carol's husband. Can I come over now to talk?" I asked. "Hi, Tom, yes, come on over," she replied, sounding hesitant, probably wondering why I wanted to see her. As I drove to her house, I thought about what to say. Telling a woman her husband is cheating is never easy, and it was more awkward since I didn't know Missy well, but she needed to know. Missy went to the University of Alabama with Carol and me. She was in Carol's sorority but was 2 years younger, so we didn't socialize much. I was surprised she married Ted, as she didn't seem his type. When I arrived, she greeted me and offered me a drink. "Just water with ice, please," I said, afraid my mouth would go dry. When she brought it, I took a sip and began. "Missy, do you know where Ted is?" I asked gently. "Of course," she said. "He's at a TV convention all week." "Why?" she inquired, a note of concern creeping into her voice. "Missy, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Ted isn't at a convention. He's with my wife, having an affair at the coast," I revealed as gently as possible. Missy looked as if I'd slapped her. "That can't be," she protested. "I saw him off last night. He loves me. Carol was like a sister to me." "She wouldn't hurt me," she said, her voice trembling. Finally, she broke down. "Oh, Tom, are you sure?" she asked, tears welling in her eyes. I grimly showed her the video from the green room. As she watched, her eyes widened, and she began to cry. I sat next to her, stroking her back. "I know, Missy, I know," I said softly, trying to offer some comfort. Suddenly, she looked up, angry. "That cow seduced him, if you had her under control." She stopped when she saw my shocked face. "Oh, Tom, I'm sorry. You lost your wife too, didn't you?" Her words brought back my pain and loss, and I started crying again. We hugged, seeking comfort. Finally, we pulled away. She wiped her face and asked, "What are you going to do now?" I explained the predicament Carol had put me in, especially regarding Susan. Missy, who had no children, immediately understood Carol's influence over me and grasped my hand sympathetically. "Oh, Tom, I never thought she could be so cruel," Missy said. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to file for divorce, but I need to make sure I don't lose Susan. It's better if you don't know the details, just in case." "You're not planning anything illegal, are you?" she asked, alarmed. "No, but if I succeed, both she and Ted will regret cheating." I tried to smile to reassure her, but probably failed. "What about you? Can you rebuild your marriage after this?" "After learning how long this has been going on and they're weak together, I can't stay with him. Maybe you should use my lawyer, unless you have someone else in mind," I suggested. She gave a weak smile. "I don't know any lawyers. If you use mine, it could save you money since he already has my evidence." I handed her my lawyer's contact information. "Call him on Monday and let him know we're on the same page." She nodded and took the paper. "Missy, I need a huge favor," I said. "What is it?" she asked nervously. "Please don't tell anyone about this until you hear from me. It could cost me the chance to keep Susan." She looked at me solemnly and nodded. "I won't say a word, Tom, I promise." I thanked her and stood to leave. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "I'm going to pick up my daughter and take her out of town until this settles down." She wished me luck, and I did the same. We're both going to need it, I thought. I drove to Mrs. Alsop's house. When I arrived, Susan met me at the door and jumped into my arms. "Did you have a good time, honey?" I asked. "Oh yes, Daddy. I had a sleepover, and we had pancakes for breakfast, and I played with dolls." I thanked Mrs. Alsop and reminded her Susan wouldn't be coming next week. She looked at me shrewdly and asked, "Is everything all right, Tom?" "I hope so," I replied. She kissed Susan's cheek and said, "Take good care of her. She's like family to me." "Thank you, Mrs. Alo. It means a lot." I carried Susan to the car and buckled her in. When we got home, Susan asked, "Where's Mommy?" "Mom had to go on a trip, but you and I are going on a trip too." "Where are we going, Daddy?" she asked excitedly. "To Grandma and Grandpa's farm." She squealed and started dancing. Susan loved visiting my parents and seeing the farm animals. "Can we see the ducks and the little pigs?" she asked. "Sure, honey," I told her. "Let's get started." I grabbed our bags and we headed to the car. I considered leaving Carol a note, but decided against it. The drive to my parents' farm took a little over an hour. Susan slept most of the way. When we turned onto the gravel road, she woke up and pointed at the horses and cows. When we arrived, Mom and Dad greeted us. Susan rushed into Grandma's arms, eager to see the animals. Mom took her to the barn, giving me a concerned look. I took my bag, Dad took Susan's, and we went inside. Dad offered me a glass of fruit tea in the kitchen, its flavor reminding me of my childhood. "Okay, Tom, what's going on with you and Carol?" Dad asked bluntly, worry in his eyes. "Let's take a walk, Dad, and I'll tell you everything." I had been waiting for this conversation ever since I called and asked if we could stay for a week. They loved Carol and considered her the daughter they never had. I knew it would affect them deeply. As we walked along the fence, I told my dad the whole story. He was mostly silent, but I saw the pain in his eyes. He gasped at some parts, and by the end, there were tears in his eyes. "I can't believe Carol could do this. She's always been so good to us and such a good mother to Susan. How could she become so callous and selfish?" He looked at me carefully. "Tom, could this be some kind of misunderstanding or a joke?" I understood his denial. I still had trouble believing it myself. I pulled out my phone and showed him the video from the green room. "Watch this, Dad." When he took the phone, I reached over and pressed the arrow to start the video playing. He muttered to himself in a half-whisper, "I can't make out almost anything. Oh my God!" I saw the picture come into focus. Carol's nearly undressed body broke free from Ted Stevenson's embrace and began sliding down his torso. I took the phone from him, and he stood there helplessly, his shoulders slumped and his face tense. Then he grabbed me and put me in a tight hug. "Oh, son, I'm so sorry. It hurts me so much to see this. I can't imagine how you felt," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. We stood there for a few more minutes, then walked back to the house in silence. He kept his hand on my shoulder. I turned to him and asked, "Dad, can you tell Mom?" "I don't think I can." He nodded solemnly. "I'll do it," he said quietly. Mom and Susan were in the kitchen having a snack when we returned. Mom looked worried when she saw Dad's face. "Son," he said, "why don't you take Susan to the pond to see the ducklings?" Susan jumped up, tugging my arm. "Let's go see the ducks, Daddy," she exclaimed eagerly. I nodded gratefully to Dad and led Susan to the pond. When we got back, Mom had been crying. She hugged me tightly. "I love you, Tom. Dad and I will be here for you no matter what happens," she said, her voice trembling. "Thanks, Mom," I whispered, looking at Dad. "Thank you, Dad, that means a lot," I added. We stood together for a long time, the silence unsettling Susan. I turned to her and said, "Okay, Susan, let's go unpack and get ready for dinner." She took my hand and led me to our room. I told myself I would never lose my daughter, no matter what. The next day, we went to the old Baptist church that Mom and Dad had attended for years. I was glad to hear the familiar words and sing the old hymns. That evening, Lou called to update me on his weekend's work. I realized how lucky I was to have him as a friend and how much I owed him. When I tried to thank him, he brushed it off. "You would have done it for me," he said dismissively. He understood what I wanted to say. Then his tone changed. "Okay, Tom, are you ready to put our plan into action?" "There's no turning back once we start," he warned. I paused to consider the risks. Even if we succeeded, things could still end badly. But Carol had humiliated me and put me in an unbearable position. I had to fight back. "Lou," I said, "let's do it." Lou must have sensed my resolve. "If anything, Edie thinks you're doing the right thing," he said, cheering me up. "Do you have access to a computer?" I laughed. "Yes, we're not living in the 1800s, I replied. "Good. I'll call you tomorrow with more info," he said. "Why not just email me the link?" I asked, puzzled. "No, I want to keep this private. Just wait for my call," he insisted. I checked on Susan, making sure she was asleep in her new bed. Lou called mid-morning Monday. "When you get some privacy, go to YouTube and type WXY into the search bar," he instructed. "Watch it and tell me what you think." Mom and Dad took Susan out for a walk, so the timing was perfect. I went to YouTube and searched. One video titled, "WXY co-host Carol Martin shares her personal philosophy on love and marriage," caught my eye. The familiar theme music for the 6:00 news played. But as the camera zoomed in on Carol, her voice faded and a voiceover began. Popular news co-host Carol Martin of WXY was recently interviewed about her views on love and marriage, the voiceover announced. The screen switched to Carol saying, "Marriage is an institution that has been around as long as human society, but today it is under siege like never before." I recognized those lines from a series WXY had aired about the rising divorce rate. But instead of continuing, the voiceover returned. "What are your views on the sanctity of marriage, Carol?" The scene shifted to our den, where Carol spoke. "Wedding vows were written for another time. No one believes that nonsense anymore," she said. The scene froze, and the voiceover continued. "What about fidelity to your husband?" the voiceover asked. Carol replied, "If I want to leave and hook up with Ted Stevenson, I'll do it. That's what I want." Ted Stevenson's image appeared, leaving no doubt about who she meant. The voiceover resumed, "What about the public's opinion? Do you think your viewers would agree?" The voiceover questioned. Carol answered, "I don't care what my fans think. They're just redneck dorks. In 6 months to a year, I'll leave this town for a real city. What people here think means nothing to me." The unseen voice asked, "So you plan to have an affair with Ted Stevenson?" Carol's response was clear. "I've already told you I'm going to have my affair with Ted, and there's nothing you can do." The video switched to footage I shot in the green room, Carol nearly undressed with Ted. The stage froze on an intimate scene, and the voiceover concluded. Now Birmingham viewers are left with one question. Where are Carol and Ted this week? The WXY news theme played, showing an empty newsroom before fading out. I leaned back, feeling a mix of triumph and sadness. I called Lou, who answered. "What do you think?" "My God, Lou, you're a genius. This will ruin her career," I said, amazed. "Not bad, huh? I'm proud of it," he said cheerfully. I felt a twinge of guilt. "Were we too rough on her?" I asked. "Did she say all these things to you?" Lou countered. "Yes, but no buts. She turned into a selfish monster, and we need to show that to the world," he said firmly. "You're a good guy, Tom. If you don't do this, it won't be you who suffers, but Susan. Do you want Carol as her role model?" "You're right, Lou, there is no choice," I admitted. "So, what's next?" "Do we send out mass emails with the video link?" I asked. "No need. This will spread on its own. I'll hint to a few gossipers and it will go viral. Just be patient," he assured me. "Okay, Lou, keep me informed," I said, feeling a bit more at ease. For the next few days, Susan and I enjoyed our time at the farm. Susan learned about farming and cooking with my mom. It was a wonderful week exposing her to things she wouldn't see in the city. Meanwhile, Lou called daily with updates. On Tuesday, he chuckled as he told me Edie heard about the video from a coworker. By Wednesday, it was discussed at the Kiwanis meeting, and on Thursday, a media columnist mentioned it in the paper, ending with, "And the question on everyone's mind, where are Carol and Ted?" Lou couldn't hide his glee when he called me Thursday afternoon. "I talked to our media officer who handles WBAIX, Lou said. "The whole station is in a panic. They're getting calls from other news outlets trying to interview Carol and Ted about the video, and the WXY staff doesn't know what to do. Don Sanchez is also out of town, and no one can reach him." On Friday, Lou directed me to a media blog article on Gawker.com. It reported on the uproar caused by the WXY anchors and linked to the YouTube video, predicting that heads might roll. That morning, I called my attorney to file for divorce and arranged for Carol to be served on Saturday at the country house in Gulf Shores where she and Ted were staying. I figured it was worth the cost. I also called Missy to let her know and asked if she wanted Ted served at the same time. "No," she replied. "I'll do it myself when he gets home." I wished her luck. Other local TV stations in Birmingham, jealous of WXY's success, smelled blood when they saw the video. Lou tipped off a producer at the second highest rated channel that I was filing for divorce, which they could report as a real news event. My attorney confirmed the filing and revealed the location where Carol would be served. The station decided to go full force, sending a video crew and lead reporter to Gulf Shores on Saturday. Lou called me Saturday morning with more news. "Don Sanchez has been contacted, cut his vacation short, and is trying to return to Birmingham. The WXY staff is terrified." Lou advised me to watch the evening news on a competitor station. Saturday, usually a slow news day, saw the Carol and Ted story as the top headline. The CO host opened with a picture of Carol and Ted showing a billboard from my office window. Many Birmingham residents have been concerned about the whereabouts of Carol Martin and Ted Stevenson of WXY. "We found them in Gulf Shores." The footage cut to the reporter, Hilda O'Reilly, walking down the beach towards Carol and Ted sunbathing. Neither noticed until Hilda started asking loudly, "Carol Martin, Ted Stevenson, what can you tell us about your relationship and the stories going around in Birmingham?" Carol, dressed and unclothed, hastily covered her bosom, and Ted tried to cover his Speedo with a towel. "What do you have to say about the video all over the internet?" Hilda asked. "What video?" Carol asked, confused. "The one where you told Birmingham rednecks you came here to have an affair with Ted Stevenson," Hilda replied coldly. Carol sputtered, and Ted tried to intervene, but a man in a suit suddenly appeared asking, "Are you Carol Bailey?" Martin reflexively, Carol answered, "Yes." "Then, Miss Martin," he said, handing her an envelope, "you have been served. Your husband also instructed me to inform you that the locks on your house have been changed and you are no longer welcome there." The man walked away, leaving Carol stunned. Anger flashed in her eyes as she screamed, "That son of a cow!" Ted, realizing the cameras were still rolling, grabbed her and led her toward the resort. The camera followed, focusing on her oil-slicked backside as she stormed away. The local announcer reappeared on the screen. Carol Martin and Ted Stevenson, missing all week, were sharing a room at a posh Gulf Shores resort. Carol's husband has sued her for divorce and kicked her out of the house. We tried to contact him but couldn't get a comment. They couldn't reach me because Susan and I were at my parents' farm. Lou informed me that Carol had not believed the bluff about the locks being changed and went to the house with Ted, only to find her key didn't work. A camera crew caught her frustration. When they went to Ted's house, Missy served him divorce papers at the door, also caught on camera. They ended up spending the night in a motel. Lou got more details from our media manager, who heard from a contact at WXY. Don Sanchez returned to Birmingham and tried unsuccessfully to contact Carol and Ted, who had their phones off. Don was furious, especially after seeing the competing network's exclusive report. Ted finally called the office Sunday afternoon, and Don ordered them to the studio. They sneaked in through the service elevator to avoid the competing station's van. Don berated them for their behavior and then fired them in front of the staff. Carol screamed, "You can't do that, we have a contract." Don replied coldly, "Your contracts have a morals clause requiring you to behave according to societal norms. What we do in private is nobody's business," Carol snapped back. Don, a practicing Catholic, stood up. The priest spoke about the sanctity of marriage and the sin of infidelity at Mass this morning. He didn't mention you by name, but he referred to public figures setting a bad example. Carol recoiled, but Ted continued, "Nobody knows or cares about us." Don sarcastically replied, "Obviously you didn't see the news last night, or just look out the window." He pulled back the curtain, revealing a vandalized billboard that now read, "Birmingham's choice for the 6000 news is a strumpet," Carol gasped. Don continued, "Your behavior has dishonored the station and damaged our ratings and reputation. I have no choice but to take you off the air and terminate your contracts. Have you ever seen the original Frankenstein?" Confused, they nodded. Now said, "You are the monster, and the people of Birmingham are the angry mob. If I were you, I'd leave town as soon as possible." I was very nervous driving back to Birmingham on Sunday evening. I left late to avoid any confrontation with Carol or the media. On the way, I heard the news about Carol and Ted's dismissal. When I arrived home, the media had already left. The next morning, the Birmingham News broke a new scandal involving a city politician accused of embezzlement, pushing Ted and Carol's story to the back pages. No one cared about my reaction anymore. I took Susan to Mrs. Alsop's house. She welcomed Susan warmly, and Susan ran off to play. Mrs. Alsop gave me a sympathetic look. "I was so sad to hear about everything, Tom. I hope you and Susan are doing well." I thanked her, but didn't know how things would turn out. It was telling she didn't mention Carol. At the office, everyone was friendly but seemed to avoid me, except for Lou. He hugged me tightly. "You're a genius, Lou," I told him. "You're a master of the viral campaign." "It worked out better than we hoped," he said. "The only downside is we'll never be able to tell anyone what we did." "That's good," I replied. "Carol will figure out I was behind it and come after me. I don't want you caught in the crossfire." To my surprise, my lawyer called at the end of the week with news that Carol had decided not to contest the divorce. "But why?" I asked. "She said she'd fight me." "Her attorney talked her out of it," he said. "She wanted to countersue for invasion of privacy, but the legal questions were too complicated and she's not popular now. No sympathetic jurors." "What about Susan?" I asked. "Carol swore she'd try to take her." "Carol is unemployed with no prospects. No judge would give her custody. She's leaving town and giving up custody in your favor. She only wants to get her belongings before she leaves and to talk to you. If she signs the papers, I can talk to her before she leaves," I agreed. We arranged it for the end of the week. I got almost everything I wanted. No, that's not true. What I really wanted was my old life back, but that was impossible. At least I had my daughter, and that was what mattered most. The next night, Lou, Edie, and I celebrated over dinner. Susan came too and slept in one of their beds while we talked. I brought champagne to toast my friends. Edie raised her glass. "To us guys," she said. "I thought your scheme was crazy and would blow up in your faces, but you," she saluted me, "were fighting for your little girl, and you, my loving husband, were confident you could handle it. Thank you both for fighting and winning despite the odds. Cheers!" Lou and I agreed in unison. Before wrapping up everything, I felt the need to check on Missy Stevenson. She was an innocent bystander caught in the mess, suffering perhaps more than anyone else. I felt guilty for involving her, even though it was necessary, and Ted was the real culprit. Unlike me, Missy hadn't seen this coming. I called her, and she invited me to lunch, indicating she didn't hold a grudge. We met at a quiet restaurant. After we ordered, I asked how she was doing. "Not well, Tom," she said. "One day I'm happily married to a TV host. The next I'm divorcing a liar who humiliated me." "I know, Missy, this feels like a bad soap opera," I sympathized. She asked about my situation with Carol, and I shared the divorce results. "Good," she said vindictively. "She got what she deserved." "What about Ted?" I asked. "That coward left town without facing me. He told his lawyer to give me whatever I wanted. I don't know where he is, and I don't care, except I keep waking up reaching for him," she said, tearing up. "Are you okay financially?" I asked. "Yes and no. He left me a house, but it's too big, with a big mortgage. Ted has to pay alimony, but I don't count on it. Finding a new job for him won't be easy. I think I'll move in with my parents, find a job, and rebuild my life. This isn't how I imagined things," she said sadly. I felt terrible for her. She was a sweet person who didn't deserve this. I asked her to stay in touch and let me know where she was. I really liked Missy and hoped she could pull through. The last thing left was Carol's visit, which I wasn't looking forward to. My earlier anger had subsided with the success of our viral video. Feeling I had regained some dignity, I no longer wanted to fight with Carol or gloat. I decided to do something nice for her by having Susan there when she arrived. When Carol got out of the SUV she rented to move her belongings, she frowned, but when I let Susan run to her, the frown disappeared, replaced by a smile and happy tears. As Susan hugged her, Carol looked up and whispered, "Thank you." They played together for a long time. The visit was supposed to last an hour, but I disregarded that once I decided to have Susan there. After Susan showed and told her mother everything, Carol suggested she go to her room to play. "I'll be up soon, baby. Daddy and I need to talk first." Once Susan left, Carol turned to me, annoyed. "Thank you for that. I didn't expect you to let me see her." I just nodded. Carol's mood shifted. "You used a private conversation to destroy me and make me a laughingstock. How could you do that?" I sighed. "Carol, I don't want to fight anymore. Neither of us will win." "Easy for you to say," she snapped. "You cost me my job, my family, my future. To protect your ego?" "Carol," I said, "I wasn't going to fight, but think about it. None of this would have happened if you hadn't acted on your desires without regard for anyone else." "You brought this on yourself." Carol started to reply, but Susan called out, asking when she'd come upstairs. Carol looked at me, then went upstairs to Susan. After playing in Susan's room, Carol packed her things while talking to her. I heard their happy chatter from downstairs. Finally, Carol came back down with her suitcases, Susan following. Carol knelt in front of Susan and said, "Mom has to leave. I'll be living in another state and won't see you every day, but I'll visit whenever I can, and we can talk on the phone and video call as much as you want." Susan immediately cried out, "No, Mommy, I don't want you to go." She clung to her mother as if she were the only life raft in the ocean. Carol lifted her, hugging her tightly and trying to reassure her. "It's okay, doll. I'll see you soon, and we'll have a great time." She walked over to me, holding Susan. "Now be a good girl for Daddy. I love you, Susan. Don't forget that." Carol picked up her suitcases and walked briskly to the door, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't look back. She loaded her suitcases into the car, waved quickly, and drove away. I hugged my sobbing daughter, tears running down my cheeks too. I was losing my wife, and Susan was losing her mother. Finally, I put Susan down. "Listen," I said, "I have an idea." "What, Daddy?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "Why don't we go to the park and see the ducks and maybe get some ice cream? Would you like that?" "Oh yes," she answered, "and we can feed the cones to the ducks, can't we, Daddy?" "Of course we can," I replied, relieved to distract her. I knew she'd miss her mom, but I hoped young children were more resilient. I hoped I could adapt too. The next week I had to adapt even more. Late one night, my boss called me into his office. "Tom, you've done a great job and we appreciate your contribution to the agency." I was waiting for the but. I knew it was coming. "But this situation with your wife is affecting our clients. They ask if you're Carol's husband, and it impacts them. Our relationship with WXY is also strained, and they're a key media outlet for us." "Are you firing me?" I asked bluntly. "Absolutely not," he said. "But we think it's best if you seek employment elsewhere." "How much time do I have?" I snapped. "Take as much as you need. I'll give you a glowing letter of recommendation." It wasn't fair, but there was no point in burning bridges. I shook his hand, assured him I understood, and thanked him for the recommendation. Then I went to Lou's office. "What's up, buddy?" he asked. "I just got fired," I told him. "The supervisors think it's best for me to leave." "This is nonsense," he bellowed. "I'm going to tell them what I think." I guided him back to his chair. "You're not doing anything. I knew it was risky when I started. You've done too much for me already." He wasn't happy, but calmed down. We ended the conversation with me promising to come over for dinner on Saturday, bringing my 4-year-old friend. Then I went back to my office and updated my resume. I realized that Carol and Ted's affair had made me damaged goods in the area. Everyone liked me, but no one wanted to hire me. It was time to widen my search. Eventually, I returned to my old agency in Mobile, where the scandal hadn't followed me, and they welcomed my big city experience. I had to sell my house in Birmingham, and although the market was decent, I got little from the sale, which had to be shared with Carol. Carol didn't disappear from our lives. She started calling Susan weekly and quickly moved to Skype so they could see each other face to face. Meetings were out of the question since Carol now lived in Santa Ana, California. Our video attack on Carol had a broader impact than expected, making her job search even outside the Southeast difficult. Eventually, she got a job teaching journalism at Santa Ana College. When I reconnected with my old agency, I needed to find a place to live. The agency connected me with a real estate agent, Marilyn Elliott, who turned out to be Missy Stevenson. She showed me several properties, and we caught up on everything that had happened. Missy had moved to Mobile shortly after Ted left and started a career in residential real estate. I mentioned needing a preschool for Susan, and Missy got excited, offering to help with that and other children's activities. I enjoyed our conversation and invited her to dinner to discuss the houses. She was always pretty, like the girl next door, and I found her natural and easy to talk to. Unlike the TV personalities I was used to, she recommended a modestly priced house, which surprised me. When I asked why, she said it was where she would like to live. This honesty endeared her to me. Missy and I got married and moved into the house she liked. I was worried about how Susan and Missy would get along, but my fears were unfounded. Missy had wanted a family ever since marrying Ted, but he refused, believing a child would hinder his career. She and Susan bonded instantly. Susan even started calling her Missy Mom, which soon became just Mom. That summer, we flew to Los Angeles so Susan could visit Carol. Missy and I planned to sightsee in LA while Susan stayed with her mom for a week. I was hesitant to bring this up with Missy, considering her reasons to dislike Carol, but she thought it was a great idea. She seemed more confident in our marriage and mature about the situation than I had anticipated. We arrived at John Wayne Airport, where Carol was waiting for us. Despite seeing her often on Skype, I almost didn't recognize her in person with her short haircut and business-casual attire. Susan suddenly became shy, clinging to Missy's waist and hiding her face. Missy gently nudged her toward Carol, whispering encouragement. Eventually, Susan walked hesitantly to Carol, then ran and hugged her. Carol cried with happiness, which initially confused and worried Susan. "I'm just so happy to see you," Carol reassured her, and they hugged tightly. Carol looked at Missy and me and whispered, "Thank you." The four of us went to the baggage claim area. When Susan paused to admire items in a store window, Carol turned to us. "I know we don't have much time, but I want to apologize. I've done a lot of thinking and therapy over the past couple of years. I realized what I had become in my pursuit of stardom and how much I hurt those around me, especially you two. You probably can't forgive me, but I hope you won't hate me." Missy and I looked at each other, then hugged Carol together, letting go of a lot of past hurt. After our vacation, I called Birmingham one evening. Edie answered, and we chatted before I asked to speak to Lou. When he got on the line, I made my pitch. "You took a chance on me once, will you do it again?" I asked, feeling a surge of hope. "What are you talking about, Tom?" he replied, sounding puzzled. "Quit your job, move here, and start an advertising agency called Bailey & Faraday. What do you say? I proposed, holding my breath. Lou replied, only if we call it Faraday and Bailey. We laughed and started planning. Lou wasn't happy at his old job and was eager for something new, so my call came at the perfect time. We moved Lou and Edie to Mobile, with Missy helping them find a beautiful home nearby, even refusing a commission to make it easier for them. Shortly after opening our agency, we pitched to a potential client who loved our approach. I want to stand out. Can you guys do something like a viral campaign? He asked, looking intrigued. Lou and I smiled at each other. Yeah, I said, confidence growing. We can handle it.
Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was the Christmas season, and for James and Rachel, it should have been a time of celebration, a chance to unwind and bask in the warmth of family and friendship. The couple had always looked forward to this time of year, decorating their home, hosting holiday parties, and sharing intimate moments together. But this Christmas, something was different. Beneath the glittering lights and festive cheer, there was a dark undercurrent, a quiet tension that neither of them could escape. For James, the holidays were always a time of joy, filled with memories of family traditions and the deep connection he felt with Rachel. Over the years, they had built a life together, with shared hopes and dreams. But now, as the Christmas lights flickered on their front porch, James couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Rachel, on the other hand, seemed distant. She was no longer the woman who would eagerly help him decorate the tree or plan the perfect Christmas dinner. Her smiles felt forced, and her gaze seemed distracted, often lingering on her phone or looking past him. Every time James tried to initiate a conversation, there was a subtle, unspoken disconnect. She would smile, but it never reached her eyes. It wasn't just the holiday stress. Something had changed between them, something that neither of them had acknowledged yet. In the weeks leading up to the party, James kept telling himself it was just the holiday chaos, that Rachel was simply overwhelmed by work and the busyness of life. But as the days passed, that internal voice of doubt grew louder, and he began to question what was really happening behind the closed doors of their marriage. The scene was set for a Christmas neither of them would ever forget. What started as a holiday of family traditions and love would soon turn into the unraveling of everything James thought he knew about his wife and their relationship. The secrets, the betrayals, the lies, they were all about to come to light under the most festive of circumstances, setting the stage for a Christmas that would mark the end of their old life together. James had always been the one to make Christmas special. He would hang the lights on the roof, arrange the garland around the fireplace, and spend hours cooking a holiday feast. He loved the idea of creating perfect moments, bringing a little bit of magic into the mundane. But this year, there was a new sense of urgency. The house was decorated with every detail meticulously planned, yet something felt out of place. Rachel's once engaged participation was now reduced to silence. While James was focused on creating the ideal holiday atmosphere, Rachel seemed lost in her thoughts. The excitement she usually radiated had been replaced by an almost palpable distance. She didn't seem to care about the Christmas plans, the tree, or even their dinner guests. It wasn't just that she was preoccupied, it was as if she were in a different world altogether. Their interactions were strained. James would excitedly show her a new decoration or ask for her opinion on the food, only to be met with distracted answers or quick dismissals. Her smile, once so genuine, now seemed forced. Even their usual light-hearted banter had faded into something distant and cold. There were small signs that James couldn't ignore. Rachel seemed to spend longer periods of time away from him, retreating to the study or going out for walks alone. When they did spend time together, it was often awkward, as if they were two strangers trying to hold on to the remnants of a connection that had already begun to fade. James began to notice how she would smile at her phone, her fingers scrolling furiously as she laughed softly at something someone had sent her. His heart sank with every shared moment between Rachel and her colleague Ethan, who had often been the one to send these texts. James couldn't place it, but something about Ethan made him uneasy. He had always been professional at work, but now he appeared to be more than just a colleague. Rachel's tone was warmer, her attention more focused on him, and when they spoke, there was a familiarity between them that felt too intimate to be purely platonic. James tried to push away his growing doubts, focusing instead on the final preparations for the Christmas party. But every time he saw Ethan and Rachel together, every subtle interaction that James couldn't ignore, he felt something tighten in his chest. Something was wrong. He couldn't prove it, but he could feel it. This year's Christmas was no longer just about joy and family. The season had taken on an ominous tone, and the tension was growing, waiting to be revealed. The night of the Christmas party arrived, and James tried to push his worries to the back of his mind. Guests filled the house, laughter echoed off the walls, and the food was served, but the heaviness that hung over him remained. Rachel was still distant, lost in her world, while Ethan appeared more than comfortable among their friends. He stood too close to Rachel, laughed too easily with her, and, to James's increasing discomfort, stole more than a few glances at her. The moment that would change everything came with the hanging of the mistletoe, a harmless Christmas tradition meant to spread some light-hearted joy. The party was in full swing, people were sipping wine and chatting, when someone, perhaps it was Ethan, told Rachel to stand under the mistletoe. It was all in good fun, everyone expecting a quick kiss on the cheek or an exaggerated kiss on the lips for the amusement of the guests. But what happened next shattered James's world. Under the mistletoe, Rachel and Ethan didn't just share a playful peck. They kissed, deeply, passionately. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a confession of something hidden, something that James had long feared but hadn't dared to acknowledge. It wasn't the act that struck him the hardest. It was the intimacy of it. The connection they shared was undeniable. And worse, it was so open and public, as if they had no care for the world around them. James froze, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the two of them pull away from each other, both of them smiling in a way that made James sick to his stomach. His mind couldn't process what had just happened. How had it come to this? How had Rachel's betrayal happened so openly, so effortlessly? The laughter in the room felt like an assault on his senses. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His world had been turned upside down in that moment, and the reality of Rachel's infidelity became a harsh, painful truth. He didn't know how long he stood there, rooted to the spot, watching as Ethan and Rachel exchanged glances as though they had just shared the most ordinary of moments. When the party finally began to wind down, James couldn't hold it in any longer. His emotions were a storm of rage, confusion, and heartbreak. He had to confront Rachel. He needed to know the truth, to understand why she had done this to him, to their family. He found her in the quiet of the hallway, away from the noise of the remaining guests. There was no more pretending, no more smiles or festive cheer. "What was that, Rachel? What was that kiss?" His voice cracked as the pain hit him with full force. "Under the mistletoe, you kissed him like you've been doing it for months." Rachel's face went pale, and for a long moment, she said nothing. The guilt was written all over her face, and James knew he had been right all along. She had been hiding something from him, something far deeper than he had feared. Finally, after a long silence, Rachel broke down. She explained tearfully that the kiss with Ethan was not a mistake. It wasn't just a fleeting moment of passion. It was the culmination of months of emotional neglect. She admitted that she and Ethan had grown close over time, their emotional connection growing stronger with every conversation, every shared moment of vulnerability. Ethan had made her feel seen, heard, things that James had stopped doing years ago. The lack of emotional intimacy in their marriage had created a void that Rachel had filled with Ethan. As Rachel confessed, James's heart shattered. He had always believed in their love, in their marriage. How could it have come to this? Why hadn't she come to him with her feelings instead of seeking solace in another man's arms? He was hurt, but more than that, he was confused. He had failed to see the cracks in their marriage until it was too late. But the confession didn't stop there. Rachel admitted that the affair had been ongoing for months, with the emotional intimacy gradually turning physical. Each revelation felt like a knife in James's chest. The Christmas they had shared, the life they had built, it was all a lie. The confrontation had left James reeling. His emotions were raw, and every thought felt like it was stabbing him from the inside. The festive lights, the laughter from the party, everything that had once been a symbol of happiness now seemed like a cruel reminder of his pain. Rachel, too, was devastated by what had happened. She couldn't undo the past, couldn't fix the damage that had been done. She tried to apologize, to beg for forgiveness. But James was beyond words. How could he forgive her? The trust between them had been shattered beyond repair. The Christmas that should have been a celebration had now become a day he would never forget for all the wrong reasons. In the days that followed, James struggled with a decision he had never anticipated. Could he ever move past the betrayal, or had their relationship been irreparably broken? Rachel, in her guilt, offered to do whatever it took to rebuild their marriage, but James didn't know if he could ever look at her the same way again. Christmas, once a symbol of warmth and love, had been tainted forever. The memories of this holiday would linger in his mind, not as a time of joy, but as a painful chapter in their lives. The love they had shared was no longer enough to hold them together. Now, they both faced an uncertain future, one that would require healing, introspection, and a difficult decision about whether they could ever rebuild what had been lost. This Christmas had marked the end of an era for James and Rachel. Their marriage, once filled with love and trust, was now on the edge of collapse. The journey ahead was unclear. Would they be able to rebuild their relationship, or would they find themselves lost in the wreckage of their past? The story of their love, now overshadowed by betrayal, had taken a painful turn. For James, this was no longer about the Christmas he had envisioned. It was about finding the strength to face the truth, the courage to forgive or to walk away, and the wisdom to know that some things, no matter how hard you try, can never be the same. In the end, Christmas was no longer about the gifts or the decorations. It was about finding peace in the aftermath of heartbreak, about deciding whether love could truly survive the ultimate betrayal.
Our own house, not this cramped apartment. We need a solid financial cushion, but we're both in stable jobs. We're doing well financially, he'd counter. What are we waiting for? The right moment, I'd insist. We agreed on having one child when we were fully prepared. He'd sigh and let the subject drop, but I could sense his disappointment. At family events, I'd catch him gazing longingly at Peter. "Your sister manages just fine," he'd occasionally remark, a hint of frustration in his voice. "My sister lives off our parents and dips into their retirement savings," I'd reply firmly. "That's not the life I want for our future child." The tension between us built slowly, almost imperceptibly, like storm clouds gathering on a bright day. You know the rain is inevitable, yet you convince yourself it's still distant. I was absorbed in climbing the next rung of my career ladder, growing our house fund, and sticking to the meticulously planned 4-year timeline. Then, one Saturday, as I was spring cleaning, which inevitably meant sorting through the perennial mess on Blake's side of the closet, I found something unsettling. A phone was hidden behind his winter sweaters. It wasn't his work phone, nor his personal phone, and it was unlocked. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the messages. The first one hit me hard. It was from Emma. "Miss you already. Can't wait till Saturday." The messages, photos, and discussions that followed were a blur of betrayal, mocking me, my career, and celebrating their deceit. The timestamps revealed a month-long affair. Then one message stopped everything. "Baby's yours. The doctor confirmed today. 10 weeks. I don't remember how I got to my parents' house. I was a whirlwind of shock and rage, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Emma was there, casually watching Saturday morning cartoons with Peter. I slammed the phone on the coffee table, shattering the calm. Peter was startled, and Mom quickly ushered him out. Emma, unfazed, picked up the phone and scrolled through it nonchalantly. "Oh, well, I guess you know now. You're sleeping with my husband," I exclaimed. She shrugged dismissively. "We're in love, Amanda. These things happen. And now, with a baby coming, Blake and I plan to get married. Once he stops being difficult." "Difficult?" I was incredulous. "I'm being difficult?" "Well, yes," she said, as if explaining something simple. "You never really wanted children anyway. You're too caught up in your career. Blake needs a real family." I turned to my parents, desperate for them to intervene, to denounce this betrayal. But instead, my mom sat beside Emma, comforting her. "Amanda, try to be reasonable. Peter needs a father figure, and Blake is so good with him." The realization that I was standing alone against what was now my entire family was crushing. As the reality of another baby coming settled in, my voice faltered. "My husband and sister are having an affair, and you expect me to be reasonable?" I choked out. Dad cleared his throat uneasily. "Well, you never really wanted children, honey. And Blake, he's always wanted to be a father. Maybe this is for the best. When was the last time you cooked him dinner?" "Emma, she'd make a good wife," Mom added. I stared in disbelief at my family, all aligned against me, defending the indefensible. There was Emma, visibly pregnant with my husband's child, while Mom was already fantasizing about another wedding. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes, but his stance was clear. "A proper wife," I echoed, my voice hollow. "Like your precious Emma, who depends on you and betrays her sister?" Emma rolled her eyes dismissively. "Don't be so dramatic, Amanda. Just go back to your big office and your important meetings. Leave the family stuff to people who care about it." I barely recall the drive back from my parents' house. The world seemed surreal, as though I was observing someone else's life crumbling, not my own. When I entered our home, Blake was in the living room, acting as if it was just another normal Saturday. "Hey, honey," he greeted, moving to hug me with that familiar, now sickening smile. I stepped back, holding up the secret phone I had found. "Want to explain this?" His expression shifted, from confusion to recognition, then to fear. "Where did you find that?" he stammered, clearly flustered. "In our closet, while cleaning." "You really should find better hiding spots for your affair phones," I retorted. "Amanda, I can explain. The messages? The photos? Or maybe how you got my sister pregnant," I demanded. He initially tried to deny it, but seeing the resolve in my face, he dropped the act.
"Fine.
"Yes, Emma and I are together," he snapped. "What did you expect? You're never home. All you care about is work. When was the last time we had a real conversation about starting a family? So, this is my fault. I shot back. You cheated because I wanted financial security before having kids. You never wanted kids. Not really. You always had an excuse: the house, the savings, the right time. Emma wants a family. She gets what's important in life. I looked at him, this stranger with my husband's face, and felt nothing but revulsion. What's important in life is loyalty, honor, and basic human decency. But I guess those aren't important to you or my sister. Don't act all high and mighty, he retorted. You're just angry because Emma's giving me what you wouldn't. The divorce papers were filed the next day. Having proof of the affair made the process swift. My brothers, Mike and Daniel, came to help me move out. They were the only family members who stood by me. Emma was always spoiled, Mike remarked as we packed. But this is a new low. Daniel, unable to even utter her name, declared, "They're dead to me." Both of them. Through my brothers, I inadvertently kept abreast of updates I'd rather avoid. Blake and Emma had a quiet wedding, attended by my beaming parents. Emma gave birth to a girl. Despite everything, life moved on, but without them in mind. As they often do, he stammered, "It's not. I didn't." But seeing the resolve in my face, he dropped the act.
Fine.
"Yes, Emma and I are together," he snapped. "What did you expect? You're never home. All you care about is work. When was the last time we had a real conversation about starting a family? So, this is my fault? You cheated because I wanted financial security before having kids." I shot back. "You never wanted kids, not really. You always had an excuse: the house, the savings, the right time. Emma wants a family. She gets what's important in life." I looked at him, this stranger with my husband's face, and felt nothing but revulsion. What's important in life is loyalty, honor, and basic human decency. But I guess those aren't important to you or my sister. Don't act all high and mighty, he retorted. You're just angry because Emma's giving me what you wouldn't. The divorce papers were filed the next day. Having proof of the affair made the process swift. My brothers, Mike and Daniel, came to help me move out. They were the only family members who stood by me. Emma was always spoiled, Mike remarked as we packed. But this is a new low. Daniel, unable to even utter her name, declared, "They're dead to me." Both of them. Through my brothers, I inadvertently kept abreast of updates I'd rather avoid. Blake and Emma had a quiet wedding, attended by my beaming parents. Emma gave birth to a girl. Despite everything, life moved on, but without them in mind. They settled into a modest house in the suburbs. Peter began calling Blake Dad. Mom kept urging us to visit, clinging to the idea that we needed to be a family again. Mike shared this with me during one of our monthly dinners. "She says we need to be a family again," he relayed. "We are a family," Daniel responded, raising his glass. "The three of us. That's enough." I nodded, thankful for the loyalty of my brothers. In a world where fidelity seems scarce, we alone recognized that some betrayals are irreparable, some bridges permanently burned, and sometimes families are healthier apart. Years of change shaped new lives for all of us. My new apartment was a loft with a view of the city skyline, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, and ample space to showcase the art collection I had always dreamed of. The Mercedes parked in my reserved spot shone under the garage lights. I had achieved everything as planned. My brothers frequently visited, sharing snippets of news. Emma and Blake were floundering, having moved 4 times in 3 years, each home smaller than the last. But their struggles were no longer my concern. Then, on a Tuesday evening, a familiar number illuminated my phone screen. Amanda, Blake's voice came through, aged yet recognizable, tightening my stomach. "Please don't hang up." I should have, but instead I listened. "We need your help," he said, as if he had any right to ask. "Emma had an accident, a compound fracture. She's had surgery, can't move, can't care for the kids, and she's pregnant again." I sat, phone pressed to my ear, wondering if this was some cruel joke. "The kids need someone to pick them up from school, to watch them until I get home. Peter's struggling to manage, and with the new baby." "You thought what?" My voice was eerily calm. "That I would help. They're your nephews, Amanda. Your family. Emma can't even get to the bathroom by herself. My family, I repeated. The sister who betrayed me with my husband? That's my family. Don't be like that, he snapped, his tone now accusatory. This isn't about us. It's about innocent children who need help. Are you too selfish to care? Too selfish, I scoffed. That's rich coming from you. We're struggling here. His voice rose. Do you know how hard it is keeping up with the expenses of children? I'm working overtime just to keep food on the table. We can't even afford a decent place to live. Meanwhile, you're living it up in your luxury condo with your fancy car. So this is about money? I countered sharply. Not all of us can just focus on our careers, he retorted bitterly. Some of us have real responsibilities. Must be nice, I replied coldly. Having the family you stole and no way to support them. Sounds like a real dream come true. The kids need parents who didn't build their lives on betrayal. Goodbye, Blake. I hung up mid-protest and blocked his number before he could call again. My mother's number flashing on my phone was almost as unwelcome. I answered anyway, out of some lingering habit. Amanda, Mom began, with that tone she used when she wanted something. We need to talk about Emma. She needs help. Blake called you, didn't he? As I paced my living room, her voice came through the phone, strained and pleading. He told you about her leg, didn't he? Yes, he did. And I told him what I'm telling you. Not my problem. How can you be so cold? She's your sister, and she's struggling with 3 kids, soon to be 4. The sister who slept with my husband? That sister? I replied, my voice icy. Mom sighed heavily. That was years ago, Amanda. You need to move past it. We're family. Funny how family only matters when you need something from me, I countered. Her silence was telling. We've helped her as much as we can, Mom's voice cracked. But she keeps asking for more, money for the kids, the rent, everything. We've gone through all our savings. Your father and we can't keep this up. I couldn't suppress a bitter laugh. So the golden child is finally becoming too expensive to maintain? Don't be cruel, she said. She's never learned to. To what? Work? Support herself? Take responsibility for her actions? I cut her off. Her voice faltered. We did our best. No, I snapped. You did your easiest. And now you're calling me because the monster you created is too expensive to feed. I wonder why that is, I said coldly. She just keeps having babies, Mom blurted out, frustration seeping through. She won't look for a job, says she's too busy with the children, but she's always asking for money. Always needing something? Sounds exactly like the person you raised her to be, I replied icily. The princess who never had to face consequences. You have no right to speak to me like that. Mom's voice rose sharply. I am your mother. And whose fault is it that Emma turned out this way? Who taught her that she never had to work for anything? That someone would always bail her out? We did our best. Mom shot back. No, you did your easiest, I snapped. And now you're calling me because the monster you created is too expensive to feed. You have a duty to help your family. Mom was shouting now. After everything we've done for you. I interrupted, my voice cutting through her rant. You mean like supporting my sister when she had an affair with my husband? Or like calling me selfish for wanting financial security before having children? I don't owe you anything. I hung up before she could respond, my hand shaking with years of pent-up frustration. The view from my apartment suddenly seemed like the sweetest revenge, a life built exactly as I'd planned it, without their help or their approval. Later that evening, while I was reviewing quarterly reports, Mike called. You'll never guess who tried calling me today, he said. Emma, I guessed, already aware that the desperation tour was making its rounds. Bingo, he said with a snort. Wanted me to help with the kids. Maybe loan them some money until they get back on their feet. As if they were ever on their feet to begin with, I muttered. What did you tell her? The same thing Daniel told her yesterday. Some betrayals can't be undone, Mike replied. What she did to you wasn't just cheating. It was destroying a family. She started crying, saying we were being cruel, that family should help family. He paused for effect. I reminded her she didn't seem too concerned about family when she was sleeping with your husband. How did she take that? About as well as you'd expect. Started screaming about how we're all against her, how nobody understands how hard her life is, he said, chuckling darkly. Guess karma finally caught up with her. 3 weeks later, Daniel brought the news I'd been expecting. They've moved in with Mom and Dad, he said. Emma, Blake, the kids, all under one roof. The family saga continued, just without me. With a new baby on the way, Dad was turning his workshop into an extra bedroom. Mom and Dad, who had been looking forward to a tranquil retirement, were now on full-time babysitting and financial support duty while Emma recuperated. Mom kept an eye on the kids, though from what I heard, she mostly scrolled through her phone all day. Dad was even tapping into his pension to help cover their expenses. Yesterday, Mom dropped by my place. She seemed worried and asked if I could help them out since they were feeling overwhelmed. I wasn't surprised to hear this. The following day, she showed up unannounced at my door. I hardly recognized her. She seemed visibly older and exhausted, beyond just the physical. Before she could respond to her plea, I stopped her. Listen, you've made your decisions, I told her firmly. You chose to indulge Emma, even when she hurt me. You allowed them to move in. These were your choices. Now you have to live with them. If you show up here again, I will call the police. Are we clear? She tried to speak, but I didn't let her continue. Remember, this is the bed you made, I added. Then, I shut the door on her, blocking her number, the last family contact I had, except for my brothers. That evening, I had dinner with Tony, whom I'd been seeing for a few months. He knew all about the family troubles and had always been supportive without pressing me. After I shared the latest happenings, he reached out and held my hand. Family isn't just about blood relations, he reminded me gently. Sometimes it's about the people you choose. I felt reassured as I thought of the support from my brothers and Tony. I mentioned to Tony that my brothers were visiting over the weekend and invited him to join. His smile was all the confirmation I needed. For the first time in a while, I felt genuinely content with where I was and the choices I'd made. The chaos at my parents' house was no longer my burden. I was focused on living my life, building my own family, and safeguarding my happiness.
Title: At a bookstore cafe, she claimed to be meeting a friend. When I walked over with her lover's wife, their book club turned into a scene no one expected. When Emily kissed me goodbye that evening, her smile seemed genuine, but her eyes carried a flicker of something else, something she tried to mask. I'm just meeting a friend to discuss the latest book, she said casually, grabbing her purse and heading out the door of our charming brownstone in Brooklyn, New York. At first it sounded harmless, like any other Thursday night, but I couldn't ignore the unease that had been building for weeks. Emily had been distant lately, always preoccupied, her phone glued to her hand and perpetually face down on the counter. Her once regular chatter about work had dwindled into vague responses, and her laughter, which used to light up the room, felt forced, almost rehearsed. That night, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to her book club than she was letting on. It wasn't just the way she avoided eye contact when I asked simple questions, or how she rushed to silence her phone whenever a notification came in. There was something about the faint perfume she wore, a fragrance she hadn't used before, and the extra time she spent getting ready for these so-called meetings. As she walked out the door, I glanced at the kitchen counter and noticed something small but striking, a bracelet. It was elegant, with a unique design, and I knew for certain it wasn't hers. That moment felt like the start of a thread unraveling, a thread I couldn't ignore. Something about Emily's story didn't add up, and deep down I knew I had to find out the truth. As I sat in the living room of our Brooklyn apartment watching the evening light fade behind the skyline, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Emily. Over the past few months, I'd noticed subtle but undeniable changes in her behavior. It wasn't anything huge at first, just small shifts that made my stomach twist with unease. Her once open and easygoing nature had become guarded. She started taking secretive phone calls in another room, her voice lowering to a whisper every time someone called. At first, I brushed it off. She was busy with work, or maybe meeting friends I hadn't heard about. But then came the unexplained absences. More often than not, she'd leave the apartment at odd hours for these vague meetings or events that I couldn't fully trace. She'd return hours later, acting like everything was fine, but there was always something about her that seemed distant, almost unreachable. It was as if she was physically there, but emotionally she was miles away. I wanted to believe it was just stress from work or life in general, but deep down, something told me this wasn't just stress. This was different. One evening, as she was getting ready to leave again, she casually mentioned a book club meeting, a typical harmless excuse, one that should have made me think nothing of it. But I felt the sudden weight of her words. Her tone was too rehearsed, and the way she said it, almost like a script she'd memorized, sent a cold chill down my spine. I tried to dismiss it, but as she reached for her bag, I saw something that made my heart race. Her phone buzzed with a message, but before I could even catch a glimpse of the screen, she quickly swiped it away and tucked the phone into her purse. The speed with which she did it, the urgency in her actions, was enough to stop me in my tracks. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just a simple book club meeting. Something else was going on, something she didn't want me to know. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, but the knot in my stomach was too tight to ignore. It was as if all the pieces were starting to fall into place, and I couldn't ignore the growing fear that I was losing her, and maybe losing her to someone else. The unease that had been building within me for weeks finally erupted when I made a discovery that I couldn't ignore. It happened on a random Tuesday morning when I was cleaning up the kitchen. As I was wiping down the counter, my eyes caught something gleaming underneath the sink. My wife's bracelet. It was a delicate piece, silver with a small, ornate charm hanging from it. At first I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just misplaced. But as I picked it up, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. This wasn't a bracelet she normally wore. I had never seen it before, and it didn't match any of the pieces she'd had in the years we'd been together. I could feel the weight of it in my hands. Something was off. I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was just a gift from a friend, or a recent purchase she hadn't mentioned. But deep down, the feeling of unease only deepened, nagging at the back of my mind like an unanswered question. Later that day, as I scrolled through my social media feed absent-mindedly, my eyes froze on a photo that hit me like a freight train. It was a picture of a dinner party, one I hadn't been invited to. In the shot, a woman I recognized, a familiar face from our neighborhood, was wearing the same bracelet, the one that had been sitting on my kitchen counter earlier that morning. My heart skipped a beat. She was married to Greg, a man I'd always felt uncomfortable around. There was something about him I couldn't put my finger on, an air of secrecy that made me question his intentions whenever he was near Emily. The realization hit me like a wave. The bracelet belonged to Greg's wife, and somehow it had ended up in my house. This wasn't a coincidence. It was the beginning of something far darker than I had imagined. My mind raced with questions. How had the bracelet gotten here? Was Emily involved with Greg, or was there another layer to this betrayal? I needed answers, and I knew the only way to get them was to confront the woman in the photo, and ultimately, confront my wife. This was the moment I couldn't ignore, the moment I decided to take action. The plan was simple. I would find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The discovery of the bracelet was like a key turning in the lock of a mystery I had been too afraid to face. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, but I knew I needed more information. The woman in the photo, Greg's wife, was the only link I had to understanding how my wife's secret life was unfolding. I couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that something far worse than an innocent book club was happening behind my back. My heart raced as I dialed the number I had carefully copied from the social media post. When the phone rang, each second felt like an eternity. What was I about to uncover? When the voice on the other end of the line finally answered, I hesitated for just a moment before speaking. "Hi. I'm not sure if this is going to make sense, but I think I've seen you in a recent photo." I briefly explained how I had come across the picture of her wearing the bracelet in question and mentioned my concerns about the strange behavior I'd noticed in my wife. To my surprise, she didn't dismiss me outright or hang up. Instead, she listened in silence before confessing something that sent my heart into my throat. "I've been suspicious of Greg for a while now," she said, her voice tinged with pain. "He keeps disappearing for work dinners, but it doesn't add up. He's always evasive about the details. And then, when I saw him texting Emily recently, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on." Her admission was a shock, but in a strange way, it was also a relief. I wasn't alone in my doubts. She had been sensing the same betrayals, the same lies that had been eating away at me. Our suspicions were united, and for the first time, I felt like I had someone who understood the depths of what I was going through. We both needed answers, but neither of us was ready to confront our spouses alone. Together, we made a pact. We would meet in person, and once united in our shared betrayal, we would follow our spouses to the next book club gathering. It wasn't just about confronting them. It was about exposing the truth, whatever it might be, and holding them accountable for the lies they'd both told. As the day of our meeting grew closer, I felt a mix of dread and anticipation. I didn't know how I would react once I saw Emily with Greg, but I knew this was the only way forward. The stakes were higher now, and there was no turning back. The day of the confrontation arrived faster than I expected. The nerves in my stomach twisted into knots as I met the woman who had become an unexpected ally in this twisted mess. Together, we walked toward the bookstore cafe, a cozy, rustic spot in downtown Brooklyn that we both knew well. It was the kind of place you could lose yourself in, books lining the shelves, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee in the air, and the soft murmur of conversation around you. At first, as we entered the cafe, everything seemed ordinary. The hustle and bustle of the evening crowd made it feel like just another evening, another group of people lost in their own worlds. But then we spotted them, Emily and Greg seated in the back corner, too close for comfort. I froze for a moment as I watched them. Emily was laughing, genuinely it seemed, her head thrown back in amusement as Greg leaned in closer than any casual conversation would warrant. There was something in the way they interacted that sent a chill down my spine. The laughter, the closeness, the way her eyes sparkled as she looked at him. All of it screamed intimacy, something far beyond what she had ever shared with me. My mind raced as the truth hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a book club meeting. It was something far worse, a betrayal I had never imagined in my worst nightmares. The woman beside me, Greg's wife, took a deep breath and made the first move. She walked up to their table without hesitation, and when they saw her approaching, their smiles faltered. Greg's eyes widened in shock, his hand freezing mid-air as though he were caught red-handed. He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, she spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "Greg," she began, her tone sharp enough to cut through the tension in the room. "I know about you and Emily. Don't even try to deny it. I've seen the messages. I've heard enough to know that you've been lying to me for months." The cafe seemed to fall silent. The murmur of voices around us suddenly hushed, as all eyes turned to the scene unfolding at the table. Greg's face drained of color, his lips parted in disbelief. But before he could respond, I stepped forward, my eyes locking with Emily's. The shock on her face was immediate, but there was no time to waste. I couldn't hold back anymore. The betrayal was too raw, too devastating to ignore. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but filled with the pain of 1,000 questions. "I know everything. The book club, the late nights, the secretive messages. You've been lying to me. How long were you going to keep this up?" For a moment, she just stared at me, her lips pressed together as if trying to find the right words to justify her actions. The silence between us felt suffocating. The weight of the lies, the deceit, was hanging in the air, and there was no escaping it. Finally, she spoke, but her words didn't hold the same warmth they once did. I didn't want to hurt you, but I don't know how else to explain it," she whispered, her voice cracking under the pressure. The confrontation, which had begun with a single step into the cafe, had quickly escalated into something neither of us had anticipated. But it wasn't just about catching them in the act. It was about reclaiming the truth, about understanding why the people we loved had turned their backs on us. Together, the two of us, united by the same betrayal, stared at the faces of our unfaithful spouses. No more lies, no more pretending. This was the reckoning. The tension in the cafe was palpable. The once bustling bookstore had transformed into an arena of raw emotions, with all eyes on the four of us. As the confrontation unfolded at the table, the quiet hum of conversation began to fade, replaced by the soft whispers of patrons who couldn't help but eavesdrop. It wasn't just a conversation. It had become a spectacle. Each word we spoke, each accusation thrown into the air, seemed to hang over the room, creating a thick, suffocating atmosphere. The murmurs among the cafe-goers grew louder, punctuated by stolen glances and the occasional gasp as they witnessed a betrayal unraveling in real time. Some pretended to look away, but it was impossible to ignore the scene in front of them. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked at Emily and Greg, their faces flushed with embarrassment and guilt. But what was even more painful was the awareness that we weren't alone anymore. Our private, painful moment had been turned into public humiliation. It was no longer just about confronting the lies we had lived with. It was about the shame that now soaked the air, turning our pain into something for everyone else to witness. People tried to act like they weren't watching, but their eyes were everywhere. I could hear them whispering behind their coffee cups, exchanging looks that only deepened the ache in my chest. My anger surged, but I knew we had come too far to stop now. The truth had to come out, even if it meant we were exposed. Just as I thought we'd reached the breaking point, the unexpected happened. A voice, calm yet heavy with authority, cut through the tension. A woman who had been sitting at the far end of the cafe stood up, her expression unwavering as she made her way toward us. She was older, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and she had the air of someone who had seen more than her fair share of drama in public places. As she approached, I couldn't help but notice the way Greg stiffened, his eyes darting nervously. "I couldn't help but overhear," she said, her voice steady, but with an edge of concern. "But I think you're all missing something important here." The cafe fell silent as all eyes turned to her. My stomach dropped as I tried to read her, but she seemed oddly calm, even sympathetic. She locked eyes with Greg before continuing. "I don't know if you're aware," she said, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. "But I know exactly who you are. And I know exactly what you've been doing." I stared at her, confused, as Greg's face drained of color. This wasn't just another concerned patron stepping in. This was someone who knew Greg and, more importantly, knew something I didn't. "What are you talking about?" Greg muttered, his voice barely audible, but his unease was palpable. The woman didn't hesitate. She looked at Greg, then at Emily and me, her gaze full of compassion as she spoke the words that shattered what little was left of my world. "You see, I've been following this little soap opera for months now." Greg isn't just having an affair with your wife. He's been doing this for a long time. And worse, there's someone else involved in this mess. Someone you don't know about yet. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. I turned to Emily, my eyes searching hers for any explanation. But she could only stand there, stunned, as the full weight of the situation began to sink in. The cafe-goers around us shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what would come next. The woman continued, her voice steady as she dropped the final bombshell. There's another woman involved, a third party, someone even more dangerous to your lives than you think. Greg has been playing both sides, and I'm afraid it's about to get a whole lot messier. Her words hung in the air, each syllable adding another layer to the web of lies that had been spun around us. I felt my legs buckle as the truth kept spinning out of control. Not only had my wife betrayed me, but Greg had dragged even more people into this nightmare. The cafe, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt like the epicenter of a catastrophe I couldn't escape from. The cafe, which had once been a quiet haven for book lovers, now felt like a war zone. The heavy silence that followed the shocking revelation of Greg's double life hung in the air, suffocating and unbearable. In the aftermath of the public drama, the couples were left standing, stunned and shaken. Emily and Greg, their faces pale and their eyes filled with disbelief, had no words to defend themselves. The evidence was irrefutable. There was no way to cover up the lies any longer. The truth had been laid bare in front of strangers, in a place that once felt safe and familiar. Both of them tried to speak, their voices wavering with embarrassment and guilt, but no one was listening. The damage was done. Their attempts to justify their actions fell flat, their words lost in the whirl of emotions that had erupted in the cafe. With their heads low, they left separately, unable to face the people they had betrayed. As they disappeared through the cafe doors, their reputations in tatters, the weight of the moment lingered. For me, the flood of emotions was overwhelming: anger, sorrow, and a deep sense of loss. But as I watched them walk away, I realized something profound. There was no going back from this. The lies had torn everything apart, and now we were all left to pick up the pieces. The scene had quieted down, the whispers of the cafe patrons slowly dying down as they returned to their own lives. Yet in the stillness of the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. With the lovers gone, I turned to the one person who had, in some strange way, become my ally in this war: Greg's wife. She was standing beside me, her face pale, her eyes red from the tears she had tried to hide. But there was something in her gaze that mirrored my own pain, an understanding, a shared grief that only those who have been betrayed can truly comprehend. We both sat down at a nearby table, the silence between us at first heavy, but gradually a sense of connection formed. We were both victims in this twisted story, both crushed by the weight of the lies we had been fed. I could feel the tremor in her voice as she spoke, her words full of sorrow, but also an unexpected strength. "I never saw it coming," she said quietly, staring down at her hands. "I thought I knew him, Greg, thought we were happy. But I guess I was living in a fantasy." She let out a shaky breath, wiping away a tear that had escaped. "And now, I don't even know who I am anymore." Her words hit me hard, and for a moment, I found myself at a loss for what to say. There was a deep ache in both of us, a shared pain that no one else could understand. Yet, as we sat together in that cafe, something shifted. I didn't feel as alone as I had just moments before. We were two strangers brought together by the same betrayal, two souls left broken but not defeated. "I don't have all the answers," I said after a long pause. "But I know I can't keep living like this. I have to move forward, find some kind of peace, even if it's just one step at a time." I looked at her, my eyes meeting hers with a quiet resolve. I can't let the lies define. She nodded, her eyes filled with both sadness and something else. Hope, perhaps. I think I need to do the same, she said softly. I don't know where to start, but I can't let this destroy me. I've lost so much already, but I have to rebuild. There, in the quiet aftermath of the confrontation, the two of us found a strange comfort in each other's company. Neither of us knew what the future held, but in that moment, we both understood something crucial. We had the power to move forward, to reclaim our lives, and find strength in our independence. As the cafe's front door closed softly behind us, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of finality. The scene in the bookstore cafe had been chaotic, raw, and painful, but it had also brought a sense of clarity I had never expected. The weight of the confrontation was still heavy on my chest, and the silence between the lover's wife and me was not one of comfort, but of shared understanding. Yet as I stepped into the cool evening air, the burden of the lies and betrayal that had haunted me for so long seemed a little lighter. There was no happy ending, no neatly tied-up resolution that could erase the pain. My marriage was over, the foundation shattered beyond repair, and I was left with the ruins of a life I had once known. But as I walked away from the cafe, I found myself reflecting on something new, something unexpected. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. I wasn't tied to the lies anymore. I wasn't shackled by the false promises and secrets that had haunted our home. The clarity that had come with the truth wasn't a relief from the pain, but it gave me something far more powerful, a sense of direction. I didn't need to look back anymore. The life I had built, the marriage I had once held so tightly to, no longer defined me. I had a new understanding of what I deserved: honesty, respect, and a relationship built on trust. I had learned, through the wreckage, that I deserved better than the deception I had been living in. There was no fanfare, no dramatic conclusion, but walking away from that cafe felt like the first step toward healing. I could hear the hum of the city around me, a reminder that life would go on. But now, I was no longer tethered to the past. I was moving forward, and for the first time, I knew where I was going. As the night sky grew darker and the city lights flickered on, I thought back to the words I had spoken earlier in the cafe. I can't let the lies define me anymore. I had meant them then, but now I understood them fully. The truth had unraveled in the most unexpected way, and while it wasn't the ending I had wanted, it was the one I needed. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There was no reconciling with Emily, no rebuilding of what had been lost. But in a strange, twisted way, it was a release. I was no longer holding on to a broken promise. The page had finally turned. I walked into the night, the echo of my steps against the pavement, a reminder that the story was over. It was time to begin a new chapter, one where I could rewrite my own future, unburdened by the shadows of the past. And while the pain of betrayal still lingered, it no longer had the power to control me. I had faced the truth, and in doing so, I had freed myself from the chains of my old life. Thank you for being a part of this story with me. If it moved, you please give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Narrative Stories. I've noticed many of you who enjoy these stories aren't subscribed yet by subscribing. You're not just following channel. You're becoming part of a community that values deep, meaningful storytelling. Let's continue exploring these heartfelt journeys together. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss our next story.